Oh, yeah. Oh, there you go. Well, welcome back to the Natural ADHD Solutions Facebook Live Summit. For our next guest, we have Alina Kislenko, and she's a registered psychotherapist. I believe you just said, gosh, I'm blanking. Anyway, and she does a lot of great work in the ADHD, Asperger's, autism spectrum world. And she'll share with you her story of, how she got to be doing that. And we're going to put a special focus today on trauma, PTSD, and that type of thing related to our children. And it might be, well, she'll tell us also, but it might not even be big traumas. There are other options there. So I'd love if you would just start by telling us a little bit about you, your story, your background, how you got to be doing what you're doing these days.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So, as mentioned, I have ADHD and Asperger's myself. I was diagnosed in my mid-20s. So that was, a big discovery for me, and that's when we opened the ADHD and Asperger's Center here in my town, Guelph, though we work with people internationally. And first we started seeing people and thinking, okay, it's all about strategies, right? Like I saw my own ADHD coach and I was like, okay, so I just need like planning strategies and like studying strategies and like how not to be too impulsive or like all that kind of stuff. And what we were finding at the center, we would do that. So throw a lot of strategies. And we'd have a lot of clients that were coming back and they would be like, hey, wait, like I didn't even do the strategies, and we'd be like, wait, why? And they'd be like, well, I tried it once, it didn't work at all, and then I just stopped. And I'd be like, oh, what stopped you from trying it a couple times? What, did you Google it? Did you do anything else? Did you look at the handouts we gave you? And they'd be like, no. So we started realizing that there's something a bit deeper with ADHD and autism that was going on that was keeping people from actually following through on trying any new strategies, even if they were ADD and Asperger's or whatever focus. And so this was also a discovery in my world. I was also, using a lot of strategies, but it wasn't perfect, right? Anyway, so we started applying a trauma focus to it. Just experimenting a bit with, is there something behind the self-sabotage for why we're not even looking through the homework, or why you're not following through, between sessions, or doing the things you leave the session saying you really, really want to do. And we discovered that trauma was a huge, huge, huge piece of things. And so we actually created something at our center that is a trauma model specifically for people with neurodiversity, so ADHD, autism. We found it really effective. And all of a sudden we started finding that we would do the trauma model with them, and then we'd give them strategies. And they'd come back and we'd be like, how did the strategy go? And they'd be like, oh, it was amazing. Like, I tried it once, it didn't work great, so I tried it 30 other times. Then I Googled it, then I asked my friend. And for the last 2 weeks, I've been doing every variant, and I found the one that works best for me. So now I'm just tweaking it. And we'd be like, wow, that was really fast. Or clients would even come back and be like, I don't need counseling or coaching anymore. I'm just Googling things. I'm just doing what I need to do for myself. And we're like, whoa, like it was mind blowing. We were really having a lot of change. And at the same time that this was happening, all of a sudden clients were reporting, without us even talking about these things in sessions, they were reporting their addictions were just going away, their eating disorders, their PTSD symptoms, that kind of thing, borderline personality traits. It was all kind of going down, and so they were just feeling a lot more in control of their lives, a lot less compulsive. So now at the center, we actually kind of go with an approach of trauma model first, if we can, unless we'll throw a strategy or two at the client. If they come back and they're like doing a great job, we're like, hey, you don't have a lot of trauma. You're able to, push through this, or you have resilience through your trauma. And for everybody else, we really quickly start the trauma model so that they can solve their own problems. And it's been really rewarding, very cool. Our trauma model for neurodiverse people is called the core model, or core obstacle processing model. And so I've also myself gone through about 10 years of trauma processing, like as a client, and I found that was just really, really helpful, especially because I'm like a totally different person than before I was diagnosed now. So I used to be like super impulsive, never thought I was good at anything, couldn't focus for very long, even on conversations, like was always overwhelmed. And just over the years of doing like my own trauma counseling, and also all the practitioners at our center, we also make them do all the trauma processing, and we all have ADD there too at our center. So all the practitioners, and we're all doing trauma work, and it's so cool because even in the practitioners, in me, in the clients, it's like been these huge changes.
Wow.
So that's a really big thing that we learned about trauma and ADD. And then we also, as we did more research into it, we learned that ADD and autistic people often have some of the biggest trauma, and they don't know it because it's not the obvious trauma.
Ah.
Yeah. And there's actually two types of trauma. So there's, well, kind of three types. There's big T trauma, and that's like more of the obvious stuff, like being beat up, rape, kidnapping, that kind of stuff. But then there's this small T trauma, which most people dismiss and don't even think is a problem. But it impacts your life just as much as big T trauma. It can be just like when you're in a stage of ready to make friends and trying to learn how to connect to others. You're really heavily rejected as a kid. It could be someone broke your secrets in a really huge way. You were gossiped about. It could be like a friend just cut off a friendship without even telling you why. These can be, there's just lots of things can happen. Like you feel really lonely and can't connect to anybody. All these can cause small T traumas, which people don't think of as trauma, so they don't own it. You know, so that causes some issues. And then there's a third type of trauma, which actually a lot of mental health practitioners get, but also people when they see those around them abused. It's called vicarious trauma. So that's when you're seeing other people be abused. And again, that does just as much to us as big T trauma. And in fact, often even worse because we can't claim it. And whenever you can't claim a trauma to like be like, okay, this is mine, when you can't claim it, then you can't heal it. You just keep dismissing it, and it gets bigger and bigger and worse. Yeah, and so we're realizing that ADDers and autistic people, we weren't having so many issues in our lives because of our neurodiversity. It was like, oh, if we just have neurodiversity, you just find people around you that get it, you find your passion, you know, get supportive people around you, create a lot of healthy boundaries and good communication. Then in that kind of environment, ADD and autism can be like amazing, which is a huge gift. But the reason why so many of us have this huge trauma is because just from a young age, we encountered a lot of ableism. So a lot of people thinking that because we do things differently, we're bad, that certain abilities and strengths are valuable, like let's say math, but other ones are not valuable. Let's say organizing our blocks really, really well, or being really, really great at catching when someone's sad, or being the best at building a train track, or knowing the names of all the literary geniuses of the last, 100 years. So these are all big strengths, but a lot of society doesn't value those. So we often get traumatized because we just feel unvalued and unconnected to others, and people reject us a lot growing up. And so as we get older, a lot of what's really in the way for us, what we've learned at the center, and for myself, it's not that we don't have the strategies, it's that we think we're a piece of crap. And when you think you're a horrible person, you don't want to invest in yourself. You know, you don't want to try things out. You don't want to allow more rejection because you become allergic to rejection. Which can cause something called rejection-sensitive dysphoria, which is really, really common in ADD and Asperger's too. Anyway, I went on for a bit, but
yeah, no, that's okay. I wrote down a bunch of questions, so yeah, no, that's great. Okay, I'm just going to run through a couple of them. You answered some of them, of course, along the way. Okay, so just back to your story just for a second, but I don't want to get off track with the other stuff because I think that's the meat of it. But I'm just curious, before you were diagnosed, were you already going on this path of professionally, or did that shift your life focus?
I definitely went into psychology because I recognized that I was really different. And the way my family communicated and the way it worked, I was often seen as like the black sheep of like, oh, Alina's doing everything different than everybody, let's all gang up on her. So that got me really curious about psychology and logic, just to like figure out what does make sense. But I was already had my undergrad in psychology at the time once I got diagnosed, and that's when I started first coaching. But then over the next couple of years, I got my master's degree. Just specialized in this field because it's just been the most satisfying and
understandably, yeah.
It's like healing my own self over and over again.
And then where did you guys come up with the idea of trying the trauma model? Like, where did that come from?
Well, okay, so first I was actually doing my practicum in supervision, so like for my master's degree, and I asked my therapist supervisor at one point, like, hey, how do you address trauma? And he kind of gave me this like wishy-washy model. He's like, this is generally what they're doing in the field, and I was like, well, that doesn't totally make sense, and that doesn't answer these questions. And anyway, so I was like, okay, good to know. So he told me a couple, and then like a couple of the theories. I came back a couple months later and said, okay, here's what I did with it. Here are the steps I broke it into. And then he was like, well, that's totally different. But then he's like, oh my God, but that answers so many questions around like trauma, things like how do you keep someone from re-traumatizing? In our model, we use a lot of grounding and a lot of making sure your cortisol, your stress hormone, can't overpump, because when you do trauma work, sometimes it can be dangerous. You can re-traumatize a client. And then, all sorts of negative things can start happening, and dissociation and that kind of stuff. So that's a big risk with trauma processes in general that exist, and I wasn't really satisfied with that. So I kind of created a new model with a lot more grounding, a lot more preparation, and a lot more structure. And over time, I started teaching other therapists about it, and everyone was like, this is insane. They were doing it with their clients. It was just working really, really effectively. So we're actually now studying it. We have these different students from different university programs studying it, and we're in the process of actually making an app with it where we can allow people to do trauma processing for themselves without a therapist. So it'll be an app that can connect to different signals in your body that can lead you through our 5-step process. And so that's a big thing we're really excited about. I guess that was
really cool.
Process.
Yeah. Okay. Well, awesome. So then you mentioned the big T trauma, small T trauma. Yeah. The other one, vicarious trauma. What was that? What you called it? Yeah. So you mentioned some examples of small T trauma, and I'm sitting here thinking, well, that sounds familiar. I mean, some of that stuff, and I imagine most people viewing, no matter what, state of, diagnosis, not diagnosis, ADHD, kid ADHD, whatever, have all, thought of that, like, well, getting rejected as a kid or those type of things. So let me see if I understand rather than just asking you, and you can either say that's correct or you can redirect. It sounds like perhaps what you're saying is that someone like yourself, perhaps, because you use yourself as an example, I think, has those experiences. You were the black sheep of the family. Everybody kind of just told you did things differently. So you already kind of were getting that message, like there was something maybe not right about you. And so you're kind of primed for that. And so then when you get rejected by kids at the school, or, you draw the cow in purple and everybody else is doing it in black and white, or whatever the case may be, you perhaps, and then maybe because of the neurodiversity that you don't, because I'm trying to think like, well, what happened to me when I got rejected on the school ground, and maybe I have locked up trauma that I'm not aware of. I guess that's a possibility. Or if not, yeah, right. Yeah, right. Well, so maybe that's the thing, and it just displays differently for each of us. And so in people, like on the spectrum, it displays in a certain way that makes them have a hard time being effective in life. I don't know. Maybe I should have just asked you because it's not as clear as I thought. So why is it?
Yeah. In the right direction. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, why don't you illuminate that? At least what I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah. Sure. Okay. So every type of trauma will not impact everybody. Like, for example, say you punched me in the face when I was a kid. By the way, the strongest trauma usually exists from childhood. Everything else that becomes traumatic over time piggybacks on that initial trauma. So often the initial trauma is the strongest. It usually happens before the age of 16, usually before the age of 12. So for example, say you punched me when I was a kid. It depends on what level I was at. Like, was I super supported? Could I talk to other people about it? Was I able to become safe after that? Then maybe there's no trauma, versus, did I get picked, I don't know, last for the volleyball team? Or when I asked to join a group, like, hey, can I join you guys? They said no. If I was at a state of development where I was learning how to trust or how to understand how I work within groups, then that can become a trauma for me. So everything will not become a trauma for everyone. It really depends how vulnerable you are, how many people are in your court, like on your side that you could talk to or process your emotions with. And if you have already learned those lessons, like developmentally, we have different stages when we're learning everything from like trust to making friends to how to be resilient to how to deal with our emotions. So the trauma usually has to be perfectly timed with stunting us from that growth. And then we kind of stay that age around that thing. And when we get triggered, we time travel back. So instead of being in the present and go, hey, okay, well, my ADHD therapist gave me an assignment to do this week. I'm going to start working on it, but wait, looking at this paper makes me feel like a failure, which reminds me of when I was 6, when my teacher gave me homework and then yelled at me when I lost it. And now I'm feeling like I'm 6 and I feel horrible, and then I'm going to my addictions or my procrastination, and I'm not doing the work today because I've just time traveled.
Right.
Yeah. So
all of that, of course, happening subconsciously. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it all happens subconsciously. But the less trauma you have, it's kind of exciting. You get to see everybody else time traveling so much, because most of the time, one person time traveling from their triggers another person. Like if all of a sudden someone's being overly mean to you, that might piggyback on your own trauma. That's like, wait, this is unfair. And then you both start kind of time traveling and acting weird and out of like alignment with the situation. And then eventually you pop back, but you're not seeing each other time travel as much because you're getting so affected yourself. But the
Right.
more you do trauma work, the less you are able to be, to go missing in your life a lot, to dissociate, to use strategies from childhood instead of the ones you have as adults. The more you see everybody else time traveling all the time. And now it's really cool because I can interact with someone, they can have a weird reaction, and I can be like, oh, I'm sorry, did that remind you of something? Or what do you think I just said? And it can like fix, like heal that interpersonal trauma really quickly. Because they'll be like, I thought you said this. No, you didn't. Oh, okay, sorry about that. It's like, great. So I didn't like just react to them.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So that's the question. Okay, so that answers why some people are more affected. So there's a lot of extraneous factors, your support network, where you are developmentally, all those kind of things. So it's that things line up just so that it can affect you for the rest of your life in a significant way. This is really cool. I just want to say because in sort of the larger ADHD world, community world, there often are there's a few I don't know about divisive, but issues that, you get a lot of opinions about that are sort of contrary to each other. And one of those is this concept of like ADHD being a gift rather than a detriment, and so, you'll see a meme posted, we've even on the Truth About ADHD page, about it being a gift, and there'll be, 100 comments and half are, yeah, totally, my kid is great at this. And the other one's like, it's not a gift, it's horrible, I lived with it. And what I think is cool, what I'm hearing in this model you guys are talking about, is how to sort of bridge that, because it sounds like, and I don't know if it works for everybody or not, I guess you could tell us, but for at least the people that it works well for, that just the bridge from, oh my gosh, ADHD is ruining my life, to, yeah, it is a gift and here's all the things I'm awesome at, could be that, that trauma, trauma work bridge. Does that make sense?
That's huge. Yeah. The trauma is usually what keeps you stunted and thinking about a lot of your parts of yourself as, oh, this is just bad, instead of going, okay, so this is who I am. Like, okay, I have brown hair, or I'm short. Okay, I'm going to adapt to that in my life. Like, short can be a gift or a curse too, depending on, are you a basketball player, or are you supposed to fit in tiny holes? I don't know. Like digging ditches. I don't know. So it's the same with ADD and Asperger's. I know for me, the more that I did my trauma work, and like, again, I worked, also just with therapists and lots of people usually focused on the trauma bits, the more I started understanding how huge it was. I mean, now I 100% see my neurodiversity as a huge gift. Like just this year, like, I finished a fiction book. We're making this app. I'm making a documentary. Like I married a partner who also has ADHD, and we're just doing the wackiest things, and we travel a lot and have a really weird life. And like, there's so much, like, for me, the ADD and neurodiversity is just a huge amount of energy, and hyper focus and passion. But then it also has a huge amount of sensory issues. I get tired in 3 seconds, easily if I'm doing something boring. Socially, I can only do so much time in a group. I have to play a lot of social games in order to want to interact with people for very long. So I made up some cool things like the question game and things I play. So once I've adapted like my life to my conditions and made sure that nobody's being ableist to me, like I took my parents to therapy. We did a lot of that to kind of heal a lot of their ableism. And kind of prejudice towards stuff around my differences, and then help them get diagnosed themselves. Like my dad was diagnosed finally with Asperger's as well. And anyway, and so the more I created a really healthy environment, and me and my partner are often couples counseling too, just because as neurodiverse people, we can't rely on norms. We have to really like build a relationship from scratch, because the norms don't make sense to us. So like the more we take control, and make it our own, the more I'm just like in my life, it's just a superpower now. And it just gives me this crazy energy to do huge things and defy gender norms and like all this neat stuff,
Uh-huh. Yeah, totally. That's pretty cool. So then I do want to get to, because you mentioned your app, and in our pre-material, you mentioned that there's a 5-step model that you guys have related, it sounds like, with the app, or related to that someone could even do, not in a coaching or counseling session. I had a great question, and now it's escaping me. So,
you want to know the steps of it?
Yeah, why don't we jump into that, and then hopefully my question will come back. Go ahead.
Awesome, great. It was very ADD kind of conversation.
Yes, exactly.
Great. staying on topic is for lamos. Okay, cool. So yeah, there's 5 steps to the trauma process. And like I would like, don't go do this at home. You know, there's a lot that we do to make it safe. Work with a therapist on this kind of stuff. We are coming out with a book on it pretty soon, so it'll kind of help you work with a therapist through it. Because, you know, there's only a handful of us that are trained so far, though we're starting a teacher training kind of program about it, because a lot of therapists seem really into it. So step 1, it's made of 2 steps. First, we do prepping. So we get you aware of what your time traveling looks like. So we don't want to re-traumatize you. We want to know the signs that you're about to go missing. So there's a lot of grounding there and a lot of, we call them flooding signs. So for example, some people get really tense. Some people think in swear words. Some people want to run. Some people get really quiet, and that's their sign that they're starting to get re-traumatized or they're starting to get stressed. So we really monitor that. Then once we've done prepping, we then go into tell the story, which is a really powerful step that a lot of emotions come out. Essentially, we tell the story right from the beginning of your life when things felt like they got dark. Like for a lot of people, there's usually either all their memories are horrible, like a lot of neurodiverse people, like their earliest memories are like rejection. But if that's not it, we start with kind of wherever you can think of, like started a negative phase in your life where you were kind of taught to think badly about yourself, and then we'll go kind of all the way to kind of your mid-adolescence, and so we talk through. We don't just go through it. We also ask you a lot of questions to really expand those memories and put them in time order. So the way trauma memories work is they're like these gelatinous huge things that are everywhere, and you just like, you can step on it in any place in your mind easily. So what we do is we try to compact it by processing it, by adding new details so they're not just light bulb memories. For example, you might, usually with trauma memories, you always run through them exactly the same way. That's what keeps them traumatic. But when you start expanding them and remembering, but what color were the walls? You know, what color, what sounds were you hearing? What did that muffin taste like before someone slapped you? Then you're actually expanding the memories and starting to put them in time and space, which is a really big part to taking a lot of the power away from the trauma memories, because research has shown that we don't remember the original memory. We only remember a photocopy of the photocopy. So we're just remembering the last time we remembered it. So we're creating like a clean photocopy so that you can be remembering it in a more updated way with your more updated faculties, like as a grown-up kind of thing. So that's tell the story. So that's kind of step 1, prepping and tell the story. Then we move on to step 2, which is emotional processing. So we take kind of key words and big emotions where you had a really, like you had a reaction or you repeated them a lot. That's usually a cue that there's something stuck in you there. There's like some emotion that didn't ever grow up, or a sentence that's really symbolic to calling up like a whole complex, you know, neuroses around it. So we draw them out. Or we can also do it in different ways, like play a musical note that sounds like it, or make a piece of clay. But we do something that subconsciously allows your brain to get it out, because a lot of the stuff is stuck in your subconscious, not even your conscious mind. So we have to make it abstract. And then we talk a lot about, like, what does that mean? And this is when usually a lot of crying and strong emotions come out, because those have been emotions and concepts that have been really locked away for a very long time. And then we move on to the impact. So we look at what's the impact of your trauma on your whole life. You know, like since your relationship, let's say with men, was problematic right from the beginning, how do you continue that in your life today? Is there anything that just naturally your instincts now are connected to this trauma? And that includes anything in your life that you're doing wrong because kind of your instincts are telling you the wrong things that aren't situation appropriate, like being mean to, let's say, a man that is being really nice to you, for example. Or it also could be, where are you not protecting yourself enough because you haven't embraced this part of your trauma? Like, look, you're not going to be comfortable, let's say, around men unless you first talk about healthy communication strategies, and then you can stop from re-traumatizing yourself in every new interaction. You know, so we really look at, like, what's the impact and what do we need to do about it? So the next step becomes optimizing. So how can we take your life today and really take who your whole self is, not who you try to pretend to be so that you don't feel horrible about yourself, but like really considering your whole self. What does your life need to look like? What are the strategies you need? What things you need to change? Like, do you know, wear loose clothes because you have sensory issues that you never acknowledged, you know? Like I did. Like I used to wear tight clothes, then I realized, oh my God, they're cutting off like 20 points of IQ for me. But I didn't realize, because I was doing it from like a traumatized place, that I was like, this is just what you do. And then I started listening to my body and going, oh my God, I'm so much stupider with tight clothes. So now I'm like, I'm always wearing like sweatshirts and stuff. And then the last step is closure. So this is where we do usually like a ritualistic process where you challenge those old beliefs. So for example, if you were always afraid to perform at something. You go and you perform with like a lot of grounding, and when you're safe, you might burn things in a fire, or that kind of stuff. Yeah, and so in that process can take a little while. Everyone's different, depends on how much they want to spend on it, like how much time they want to spend while doing it. But yeah, like huge things happen, as we mentioned. Like all of a sudden, a lot of clients would be like, I don't have an eating like I don't want to have do eating disorder activities anymore, or I all of a sudden broke up with this boyfriend who was bad for me, or this girlfriend, or like I'm gay, or all sorts of stuff. We're like, that's so cool, and then we check in with them 6 months, a year later, and they're still it's the same. Like they're not using unhealthy coping strategies. So it's been really exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So then you mentioned with the app that like you would hook things up to you somehow. What did you mean there? What would that be?
Yeah, so it would look like I mean, there would be a couple levels of it. Eventually, I actually want to get into schools and everywhere, because I think early on, that's when children, when they're just starting their trauma, they can be getting rid of it so much faster and healing from it, and so not getting stuck in those states. But we want to make it really, really affordable or free as much as possible. So there will be a sensor that you attach to a part of your body that manages your stress response, because it'll make sure that you don't go over. So it'll be managing like your sweat, your heartbeat, your everything. So as much as possible, that's the biggest thing we'll have to engineer. And it'll probably be compatible with like Fitbits and other stuff like that already do that kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
And then it'll almost talk to you like we're exploring kind of levels of artificial intelligence to include in it. So it's like able to explore things with you. And yeah, so you go through all the stages, and every stage there'll be an option like, do you want to work with a therapist on this stage? Like, do you need support? Or if the app sees that you're too stressed too often, they'll be like, I'm sorry, you really need support with this. So we really want to make it safe, because opening up trauma has to be like a really, really safe process. And we can't have people just doing it willy-nilly. It's like, you've probably had this experience in your own life. You've asked someone about something really deep, and they get really weird after that. And they start doing weird things and stop going to work. Like we have to be really careful of triggering that. So that's a big thing we're working on now.
Gotcha. So there'd be like a monitor to just be sort of the eyes that wouldn't be there of the counselor to see what that stress response is like. Gotcha.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
exactly. Monitoring it so we can send it to a therapist at any time to kind of help you with that kind of thing.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So then, I think, what I wonder, with the question that came to mind, and it's a little different than probably what happened before, but when we were talking, or when I was talking, and you were agreeing about that bridging between those two sort of viewpoints of, ADHD as we're talking about it. Well, no, I think that I'd like to move on, actually. Never mind. But so tell us about your book, your movie, those things that you mentioned.
Sure. Well, I just finished a book I'm really excited about. It still has to go through thorough editing, but I finished the whole writing of it. And I've been writing it for the last 2.5 years. And it's a journey. It's about a female with Asperger's syndrome who's actually like 200 years old, but she's like in a young person's body because she body jumps. Like we learn later on that she can't die, and so she jumps. And it's kind of about her trying to figure out what to do with each one of her decades. And she became a therapist for one, because I want to use all my therapist know-how, and that's all I think about. And then she decides she wants to bridge religion and science more together in this generation. She's a scientist from the 1800s, and so she jumps into Pope Francis, and then it actually follows. It's kind of because Pope Francis is quite actually a progressive pope, so it imagines it kind of follows his life as if she had become Pope Francis, and so he's doing all the weird stuff he does in alignment with like being, a female scientist with Asperger's syndrome. And it's a really kooky book, but I'm really excited about it because, and it's like a 3-book series. There's a couple other immortals and cool stuff that happens. But I'm really excited about it because most books about people with autism or neurodiversity are just about that thing. Like the moment they name it, they go, oh, this is Asperger's. The whole story is just, this person has Asperger's, and here's how it impacts their relationships and their work life. But they never do anything extraordinary, like very rarely does anything happen because they're just such tortured souls. But I think, like, I like that it's kind of, she has Asperger's, so there's, like, that's just great. We can name that. Women can relate to it, and people all over, as well as she does a huge amount of things and has a full life. And, yeah, it goes through a lot of intrigue and stuff like that. So that's why I'm excited about that, because I haven't really seen a lot of books out like that portraying neurodiverse people as like just like could be any, like anybody else.
Sure. No, that's really cool. Um, and so how about the movie or
Oh yeah.
film?
So I'm in the process of kind of two documentaries. They're moving slow because I do so many things at the same time. But one of them is about I've started a not-for-profit called Women Trailblazing. And with that, we go to different areas in developing countries where there are women in poverty who want to build entrepreneur and tech skills. And we teach them, but then we also teach them through teaching each other within the hub. So we keep kind of funding and supporting the hubs and then creating different ones. And I just came back from Bali, where I was there for a couple months to set up these hubs. And it was amazing. We worked in an orphanage with teenage girls. It was like super, super cool. And their issues are so much deeper than like ADD or Asperger's. Like, yes, that was totally there, but there's like so many survival issues. That was like really big eye opener for me, which was a great experience. And I want to do a documentary about these women building these tech and entrepreneur skills and kind of challenging their households and challenging these worlds that are often really misogynistic or against women. And then another documentary we're making is called Surprise Therapy. The concept there is you take kind of the way relationships are portrayed on television, how they are often there's a lot of really unhealthy things that are like common sense. For example, like people just like say really intense stuff and then just walk away, and that's a conflict discussion. And so instead we kind of make fun of that and pop out. It's a little bit like Adam Ruins Everything and go like surprise therapy, bring in the couches and also like, okay, so here's why that was unhealthy. Let's do therapy with you guys. Let's talk through like this kind of stuff. We make it really kooky and interesting and bring in experts. And just to help like change some of the norms there that are just so ridiculous around human communication. Are just not healthy, and that we strive to do what's in the media, right? And a lot of problems with that.
Right. Yeah, those are cool. Yeah.
Uh,
What's so in terms of having a bunch of stuff on your plate at once, any thoughts on the timelines of those?
we're supposed to have a prototype for the app coming out in December, but I'm working with the team. There's a lot of variables I can't control, but so that's an exciting thing with the documentaries. We just applied for some grants to build them. I actually read somewhere that men tend to apply to positions they're underqualified for, and women tend to apply for positions only once they're overqualified. And so I actually really challenged myself and applied to some grants that I was like, I totally couldn't get this, but just to challenge,
Cool.
those weird things at the back of my mind. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, have you not heard back yet?
No, well, I guess that one I'll find out in November. But
Cool.
there's just so many things all the time I'm doing. I like to have like so many irons in the fire because there's so much I can't control, but what I can control is like just the energy to do, put 5, 6, 10 hours a week into different projects. And I think that's like a really great ADD strategy is that like a lot of us seek to like, well, I need to finish this so I can prove to myself I don't suck. And for me, the deeper strategy is more, as long as I'm working on it on a regular basis within what's under my control, even if it takes 5 years, even if it takes 10 years, like building the ADHD and Asperger's Center, like that took a while, but it was just as long as, I'm doing a bit of it every week and doing what I can control and then rewarding myself, but really celebrating that, even if the world explodes on me or something happens and a magical thing happens and nobody has ADD or Asperger's, I'll be like, well, I did my best. On to something else for another 5 or 10 hours, a week. So that's a big thing that helps maintain my resilience for all the projects I do. Yeah.
Awesome. So naturally, I would assume that a lot of the people watching this are going to want to find out how to keep in touch with you, how to follow all the things you're up to, maybe even how to reach out to your center, or, you mentioned you do some work online. What's the best ways for them to do that?
Sure, yeah, and the website is ADHDinterrupted.com, so it's ADHDinterrupted.com, and then we do phone coaching and online coaching and counseling and stuff all over the world, and then we also, if you want to follow kind of the work with Women Trailblazing, that's under WTFpoverty.com, because Women Trailblazing Fellowship, WTFpoverty.com. And and also we have a really, really active Facebook page because I procrastinate a lot, so I'm always posting to it, and it's at ADHD Interrupted. It's on Twitter and Facebook and stuff, so that's our thing. Setting up an Instagram, so eventually that'll be a thing.
Yeah. Where'd that name come from? How did you come up with ADHD Interrupted?
Oh yeah. That was from kind of getting started, just like the idea of like, and at first we specialized in ADHD, and then it became autism too. Especially after I got diagnosed, I was like, oh wow. And we see so many people on the spectrum anyway that they're drawn. A lot of them have ADD too, like me. So I think with ADHD, there's kind of this concept of like ADHD is interrupting your life. So like let's interrupt your ADHD,
Uh-huh.
and like make it work for you, kind of thing, not just let it do what it wants. So that was kind of the original idea. But now that we work with people with ADD and autism, I eventually want to change it. But I haven't found anything catchy enough. So if anyone has a cool idea, like I'm
Okay,
receptive.
awesome. Awesome. Well, this has been really cool, very enlightening. I had only, I followed some of your guys' stuff and your work, but definitely, broadened what the impact of the work you're doing, is having. And, I could sort of visualize the future of, as this spreads, because it sounds like you're hard at work doing that, with your model, the trauma model and so forth, and how big of a change that can be, rather than having it be, those two things, like either, it's a problem or it's this gift, or, that we can allow for everybody's brains, because we all have, I always think of the neurodiverse, and I get it as a descriptor, but it's like, who has a brain that works the same as anybody else's, really?
Right.
But allows for all of us, in all of our unique ways to function better, create more what we want to be creating, bring who we are more into the world. I mean, that's what I hear you saying, that you're getting. That's the response with the people you guys have worked with, in their own unique ways of saying it. That's what they're saying to you. I get to be more me, share more of my brilliance with the world. So that's awesome. And then, so your ADHD productivity games ebook, that was something you had shared that you wanted to be able to share with the audience. Tell us about that and where to find that.
Yeah, it's a way that I've kind of implemented to include kind of friends, or even do it by myself, and put games around my productivity. For example, this is one example of it within the book, but a game that I did even to get all set up for today's like call, I put a bunch of like money. So I owed my husband like a quarter if I didn't set up this weird standing desk thing that I have this on, and do a couple other things by, 3:30 p.m. or whatever, that then I owe him money. So it's like games, and there's also these question games I refer to, and all these ways that I found to bring your neurodiversity and your productivity and goals and your urge to connect with others into more of a game format. That makes it a lot more fun and doable, and makes you challenge against yourself rather than try to compete with the whole world and be perfect all the time.
Cool. Cool. So like gamify, like they say, right?
Gamifying, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm a huge life hacker, so yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. And I just remembered the question I did want to ask you, and I still want to ask.
Yay.
As far as relating to kids, because, our primary audience, though we certainly have adults with ADHD and on the autism spectrum, Asperger's, all that, watching, our primary audience is parents who have kids that have been diagnosed or, might be diagnosed. What, with the trauma model is, what's the age for that? I imagine you wouldn't do that with a 2-year-old. So what do you guys see?
True. Typically, we found actually doing a lot of trauma processing with parents will help their kids a lot. It's strange, but
Makes sense.
yeah, the more you're in alignment with your kids' needs, the less your time traveling, the more you can be in alignment with your kids' needs, right? But then after a certain age, I'd say probably around 7 or 8, we can pretty easily start doing it with kids directly. And it's great because at that point, they don't have a lot of locked-in trauma yet. They're just in a phase where they're just needing to talk through their emotions, and it's a lot faster. It's usually as adults when it starts getting a lot more cooked in, so it takes a lot more time to get to those very protected parts of your subconscious and get through all those defense mechanisms around it that protects, that keeps you safe, but actually in the past. So it could be done, I'd say probably 7 and older.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. I imagine that
kids
question.
to be really receptive.
Yeah.
Really, they love talking about their emotions.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Rather than getting them locked away, the pain of that, right? So makes sense. Well, awesome. So,
that was super fun.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I had fun too, and I appreciate you taking the time. And gosh, my fax machine over there is going crazy. Anyway, appreciate you taking the time, sharing, your experience, your wisdom, and your information with us. Totally valuable.
Thanks for
and
Great.
yeah,
I'll let you take the call.
Yeah, no, it's actually my fax machine. I don't have
Oh,
I don't know. Someone's trying to get us something, but anyway, Thank you. Oh, and I'll put the links, all the things you
Awesome.
mentioned, I'll put them below in the comments for anybody looking for that. So you don't have to be furiously scribbling them down well, you already did it, I guess, if you were going to, but you'll be able to click them there. So you'll be able to keep up with that, everything. Oh, and tell us the name of your center too, that if you didn't.
Oh yeah, and we're the ADHD and Asperger's / ASD Center. Yep, ADHDinterrupted.com.
And where's the actual center located?
And we're in Guelph, Ontario, in Canada.
Okay. I figured.
We'll expand eventually, but that's where we are right now.
Awesome. Alrighty. Well, thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye.